Yes, we can start, I think. Ya, Brili, silakan.
Mulai aja ya Bu Desi ya.
Ya, sudah 3:11 ya.
Okay, good afternoon to our distinguished speakers, honored guests, and all participants. Welcome to our academic talk, Ecological Function Zone. Today we explore the role of ecological function zone that are carefully managed to support biodiversity and mitigate environmental risks. These zones or these areas that are careful This is the topic that increasingly intersects with business and economics, including the accounting fields, as sustainable becomes a higher priority for business, accounting, and finance professionals and play crucial role in measuring, reporting, and managing environmental impacts and risks. From regulatory compliance to sustainable investments, understanding ecological zones and environmental sustainability can help accountants and economics to add value in ways that aligns with both profitability and environmental stewardship. Today's discussion will show us the broader economic significance of preserving ecological function zones and highlight the role of policy, reporting, and public engagement in sustainable development. We are honored to have three outstanding speakers who bring fresh perspectives and expertise. And I'm sure their insights will inspire us to think about sustainability's importance in our own fields. So before we begin, first I would like to welcome our Head of Program Study of PPIA, Bu Desi Adaryani, to deliver the opening remarks to Bu Desi. The screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Brili, our MC and our master student today. Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, all of you, all of our participants, and also to our speakers, yeah, Sarin, Zu, and then Salim, Mas Salim, and Bu Titi, yeah. Okay, so today we will discuss about ecological function zones, which, yeah, this event was delayed from last week, yeah, because of the mess up of time differences. But fortunately, we can meet today, yeah, to discuss this important topic. And Sarin will also discuss about the role of accounting, yeah, or accountant in these ecological function zones. And I hope that Sarin will also share her experience while doing her PhD or master program, yeah, so that it can motivate our students here. And also, before we hear from Sarin Zhu, yeah, about ecological function zones and the role of accounting, we will also hear from our two speakers, yeah, to provide additional insights. From Mas Salim, Muhammad Salim is my student at extension program, yeah, undergraduate program. He is currently doing the research on bonded circularity zone, maybe, yeah, Mas Salim, yeah, we call it kawasan daur ulang berikat. So we think that this is also important aspect to discuss, which is some kind of ecological function zones in Indonesia. Yeah, so it is important to set the context. And then Bu Titi from Pulitzer Center will also discuss about yeah, her journalism, yeah, in these ecological function zones, and we hope that it can give us the additional insights about the ecological function zones in Indonesia and how we can contribute as accountant, yeah, in this zone, yeah. And also, yeah, Mas Salim and Bu Titi, you are free to deliver your material in Bahasa Indonesia. It is okay, ya, Sarin, ya. And then we will also discuss about several things related to this context or this topic, yeah. And I hope that, sorry, let me check. Okay, seems that all of our, yeah, most of our participants are students from PPIA, yeah, postgraduate program in accounting. But if there are participants from outside PPIA, I welcome you. I personally welcome you, yeah. And then please also follow our social media, either Facebook, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, so that you can get update of our activities, such as today. Okay, thank you very much. Hope that these sessions can be a very important discussion or session for us, and then we can also think of the maybe inspiration for our dissertation or thesis, from this today discussion. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to our head of program, Ibu Desi Adaryani, for the opening remarks. Before we dive into our main discussion, let's take a moment for a group photo together. Could I kindly ask everyone to turn on the camera? Because we love to capture this gathering and your wonderful smiles. Okay, I will give everyone a few seconds to get ready. Mbak Sylvie mungkin dibantu ya Mbak untuk screenshot.
Oke, Mbak.
Okay, all right. On the count of 3, let's all look at the camera and give your best smile. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, next slide. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, the last slide. 1, 2, 3, and smile.
Langsung aja. Aku nggak bisa smile.
Ya.
Sudah ya Mbak Sylvie?
Udah, Mbak.
Oke, terima kasih Mbak Sylvie. Okay, since we have 3 outstanding speakers who are experts in their fields, we encourage our audience to take this opportunity to ask questions related to today's topics. You are welcome to post your questions at the end of each speaker's presentations. This is a chance to deep our understanding and engage directly with our outstanding guests. So don't hesitate to participate and make the most of these valuable discussions. Okay, now allow me to introduce our speakers. For the first speakers, we have Mr. Muhammad Salim Noviansyah. Mr. Muhammad Salim is a customs and excise specialist in Indonesia's Ministry of Finance. He currently works as a customs audit and internal compliance analyst with expertise in customs, facilitations, and audit. Mr. Salim has strong academic background in finance from University of Indonesia and the State Finance Polytechnic or STAN, and his experience in the Directorate General of Custom and Excise provides valuable insights into how policy impacts in business operation, particularly in terms of compliance. Today, he will share his perspective on the regulatory aspects of ecological zones, kawasan daur ulang, and the relevance to the economics. For Mr. Salim, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brillantiela, as moderator. Good afternoon, all. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Especially thank you for Mrs. Desi as head of accounting program, Mrs. Dr. Yusia Serin. Glad to meet you, Mrs. Serin. And I'm excited to be here and share some thoughts, especially about bonded recycling zone that has a relation with ecological function zone. Okay, so this is an important subject that affects us in environmental, and we hope by the end of this presentation, we will have gained some new insight. And as Mrs. Desi said in first this event, I will explain in Bahasa. Oke, apa sudah terlihat?
Sudah.
Oke. Sekarang saya akan menjelaskan perihal fasilitas kawasan daur ulang berikat. Ini merupakan suatu hal yang sangat seksi karena hal ini merupakan isu strategis perihal ekonomi dan khususnya di global itu perihal ekonomi sirkular. Adapun konteks pertama yang akan dijelaskan yaitu perihal konsep dasar fasilitas kepabeanan. Nah, sebelum kita beranjak kepada penjelasan kawasan daur ulang berikat, tentu kita perlu mengetahui yaitu apa sih fasilitas kepabeanan itu. Nah, jadi kawasan daur ulang berikat itu kalau kita dari lihat sisi helikopter view itu merupakan salah satu fasilitas kepabeanan di mana kepabeanan itu sendiri adalah segala sesuatu yang berhubungan dengan pengawasan atas lalu lintas barang yang masuk atau keluar daerah pabean, serta pemungutan bea masuk dan bea keluarnya. Jadi, sederhananya kepabeanan itu perihal barang yang masuk ke Indonesia atau keluar Indonesia dan berkaitan dengan pemungutan bea masuk dan bea keluarnya. Nah, adapun untuk fasilitas kepabeanan berarti terhadap barang yang masuk atau keluar ke Indonesia tersebut itu mendapatkan suatu insentif. Nah, insentifnya itu dibagi dua, itu perihal prosedural maupun fiskal, di mana untuk prosedural ini berkaitan dengan mekanisme dari sisi pelayanan atau arus lalu lintas barangnya, sementara untuk fiskal itu perihal dari kemudahan untuk pembayaran bea masuk dan bea keluarnya. Nah, dari konsep kepabeanan tadi, kita sudah mengetahui secara ikhtisarnya, yaitu prosedural maupun fiskal. Nah, di sini terpecah menjadi dua, yaitu fasilitas prosedural dan fiskal. Untuk lebih rincinya, prosedural ini merupakan fasilitas terkait dengan pelayanan dalam rangka rilis barang impor dan ekspor yang lebih cepat, lebih baik, dan lebih efisien. Dan yang kedua, itu merupakan dari sisi kemudahan, mulai dari ease of doing business-nya, mulai dari sisi perizinannya, sistem pelayanan terintegrasinya, dan juga sampai pengawasan dan monitoring evaluasinya. Lalu untuk kalau dari sisi fasilitas fiskal, itu berkaitan dengan fasilitas terkait pembayaran bea masuk dan pajak dalam rangka impor tadi. Khususnya bisa mulai dari pembebasan, keringanan, pengembalian, atau penangguhan pungutan impor, baik itu bea masuk maupun bea keluar dalam hal untuk itu ekspor. Nah, kalau soal kawasan daur ulang berikat atau bonded recycling zone itu masuknya dapat fasilitas yang mana sih? Kalau untuk kawasan daur ulang berikat itu akan memperoleh dari sisi nomor 1 dan nomor 5, yaitu tidak dipungut dan juga penangguhan. Nah, penangguhan ini contohnya nanti kalau untuk kawasan daur ulang berikat itu para perusahaan atau para stakeholder yang memperoleh fasilitas kawasan daur ulang berikat itu akan memperoleh seperti tidak perlu bayar sementara dulu untuk bea masuk sampai dengan timbul kewajiban bayar bea masuknya. Itu maksudnya gimana? Contoh misalkan ada barang masuk di perusahaan Bapak Ibu atau suatu kawasan Bapak Ibu, itu barang yang masuk dari luar Indonesia itu akan di-hold dulu dari pembayarannya. Jadi Bapak Ibu tidak perlu bayar bea masuk atau pajak dalam rangka impor secara sederhananya. Nah, tapi Bapak Ibu itu punya tugas karena Bapak Ibu telah memperoleh fasilitas dari pemerintah itu untuk apa? Itu untuk mengelola dan mengolah barang tersebut untuk menjadi barang yang finished goods yang memiliki nilai tambah untuk nanti dikeluarkan. Nah, saat sudah jadi finished good yang memiliki nilai tambah dan juga memiliki daya saing produk yang tinggi, barang tersebut itu juga punya dua ketentuan saat keluarnya, yaitu ketentuan pertama saat ketentuan masuk ke lokal, dan ketentuan kedua itu saat direekspor kembali. Nah, kalau lokal, Bapak Ibu baru perlu membayar kewajiban bayar bea masuk maupun PDRI atau pajak dalam rangka impor. Mengapa? Karena Bapak Ibu telah memanfaatkan fasilitas tersebut, namun sayangnya itu dijual di Indonesia, tidak bertujuan untuk menjual atau mengkomersilkan barang hasil yang telah diolah tersebut ke luar negeri. Sementara kalau barang yang tadi sudah jadi finished good itu sudah dikeluarkan keluar Indonesia, itu baru bisa dinyatakan dibebaskan penuh atas pembayaran bea masuk dan PDRI. Oleh karena itu, penangguhanlah yang terjadi saat barang Bapak Ibu itu masih diolah di kawasan Bapak Ibu itu sendiri, atau dalam hal ini konteksnya kawasan daur ulang berikat. Nah, sementara untuk yang nomor 1 itu tidak dipungut. Tidak dipungut ini maksudnya apa? Itu barang yang Bapak Ibu masuk ke Indonesia, baik itu hanya sementara atau diangkut terus sementara di Jakarta, tapi nanti bisa berlanjut lagi ke Filipina, jadi dari luar negeri Singapura masuk ke Jakarta tapi keluar lagi, atau dari Singapura masuk ke Jakarta, tidak lama di Jakarta baru ke Surabaya atau diangkut lanjut, itu tidak dipungut bea masuk sama sekali. Artinya memang dinyatakan Bapak Ibu tidak perlu membayar kewajiban dari sisi bea masuknya gitu. Nah, tadi karena ini berhubungan dengan ekonomi sirkular dan kawasan daur ulang berikat, tentunya tidak hanya fasilitas kepabeanan, kita pun perlu melihat dari sisi lingkungannya. Nah, di sini tentu memang ekonomi sirkular ini di tingkat global maupun nasional itu sudah menjadi suatu isu yang cukup hangat, mengingat adanya beberapa dukungan komunitas maupun organisasi internasional, mulai dari PBB, World Economic Forum, itu tentu melihat dari sisi aspek yang tidak hanya berkaitan dengan sisi komersil atau fungsi bisnis, tetapi juga melihat dari sisi lingkungannya. Nah, adapun di sini untuk ekonomi sirkular itu yaitu model ekonomi yang bertujuan guna meminimalisasi perihal resource kita atau sumber daya itu, lalu kita desain suatu produk tersebut agar bisa mengenhance lifespan atau daya guna selama mungkin, dan di mana mengembalikan sisa proses produksi tersebut ke dalam suatu rantai nilai. Nah, rantai nilai yang dimaksud ini maksudnya memiliki nilai yang lebih tinggi atau punya value added-nya, dan nanti itu bisa dipergunakan semaksimal mungkin. Nah, selanjutnya, kalau kita lihat dari sisi yang kanan, itu merupakan konsep 9Rs dalam circular economy yang dimana telah jadi suatu pembahasan di World Customs Organization dan telah dijadikan suatu kajian perihal administrasi kepabeanan di Direktorat Kerjasama Internasional Kepabeanan dan Cukai, di Direktur Jenderal Bea dan Cukai itu sendiri, di mana total sebanyak 9R yang mendukung perihal circular economy. Nah, kalau kita lihat dari sisi kiri, ada circular economy, ada linear economy. Bedanya apa? Kalau linear economy itu bisa dibilang ini seperti bentuk upaya ekonomi dari tradisional, di mana barang yang diproduksi itu diambil, lalu dimanufakturin, dibuat, lalu dibuang menjadi waste. Jadi seperti pada umum pabriknya yang seperti kita lihat secara visual maupun secara kita lihat di praktikalnya. Sementara beda hal lainnya, kalau untuk circular economy, kita bagaimana memanfaatkan dari sisa-sisa yang telah dibuang tadi atau waste tadi, memiliki nilai tambah dan meningkatkan daya guna selama mungkin atau lifespan si barang tersebut. Nah, lalu dari hal kerangka ini, di mana implementasi circular economy ini dalam 9Rs ini membagi orientasi konsep sirkularitas dalam 3 fokus. Nah, yang pertama yaitu membuat dan menggunakan produk dengan lebih cerdas. Ini ada reuse, rethink, dan reduce. Lalu untuk memperpanjang masa pakai produk, ini ada dari R3 sampai R7, ada reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, dan repurpose. Dan yang ketiga ini ada mengambil manfaat dari material, yaitu recycle dan recover. Nah, tiap masing-masing R ini memiliki tentunya mendukung keberlanjutan dari sisi circular economy tersebut. Nah, selanjutnya, karena kita sudah mengetahui secara garis besar gambaran dari fasilitas kepabeanan dan konsep circular economy, mari kita mendalami ke topik utama tadi, sebagaimana dijelaskan di awal, yaitu perihal fasilitas kawasan daur ulang berikat. Nah, secara definisi harfiah, itu merupakan kawasan daur ulang berikat itu salah satu dari bentuk tempat penimbunan berikat. Jadi dalam peraturan pemerintah di tahun 2009 yang ditetapkan di nomor 32 dan telah diubah menjadi nomor 85 tahun 2015 tentang tempat penimbunan berikat, pemerintah itu telah memberikan suatu insentif berupa kawasan-kawasan tertentu total sebanyak 7, mulai dari kawasan berikat, gudang berikat, tempat penyelenggaraan pemeran berikat, toko bebas bea, pusat logistik berikat, tempat lelang berikat, dan terakhir kawasan daur ulang berikat. Nah, sampai dengan 2015 sampai dengan 2024, dari pemanfaatan 7 jenis dari TPB ini yang baru dimaksimalisasi oleh stakeholder, yaitu kawasan berikat, gudang berikat, pusat logistik berikat, toko bebas bea. 4 itu. Selebihnya untuk TPPB dan toko tempat lelang berikat itu hanya sifatnya insidentil saja. Sementara untuk kawasan daur ulang berikat itu belum ada sama sekali dimanfaatkan oleh para stakeholder. Nah, oleh karena itu di sini menjadi suatu isu dan strategi hangat bagi DJBC untuk mengimplementasikan kawasan daur ulang berikat. Nah, sebagaimana kalau kita lihat di samping kiri, ini definisinya yaitu salah satu jenis atau bentuk tempat penimbunan berikat guna menimbun barang impor. Itu dalam jangka waktu tertentu, guna untuk apa? Karena ini tentang kawasan daur ulang, berarti tentang kegiatan daur ulang limbah asal impor dan daerah pabean, sehingga bisa mempunyai nilai tambah, nilai ekonomi lebih tinggi. Dan atas hal tersebut tentunya TPB ini mendapatkan fasilitas yang tadi dijelaskan di awal, yaitu penangguhan bea masuk, pajak dalam rangka impor, PPN atas penyerahan barang dalam negeri. Seperti itu. Lalu, adapun untuk dari sisi latar belakang dan sasaran, Direktorat Jenderal Bea dan Cukai melihat dengan pembentukan fasilitas kawasan daur ulang berikat ini, tentunya tidak secara cepat. Tentunya ini butuh beberapa isu, baik itu dari nasional maupun dari sisi global. Nah, kalau kita lihat dari latar belakang terlebih dahulu, tadi sebagaimana dijelaskan dalam konsep ekonomi linear, bahwa ekonomi linear ini sangat tidak efektif karena dengan sifat modelnya yang ambil buat buang. Nah, dan juga dengan model yang ambil buat buang ini tentunya memiliki dampak yang cukup masif terhadap keberlanjutan, di mana keberlanjutan itu tidak bisa kita peroleh sama sekali, sehingga cukup menjadi potensi besar meningkatnya waste di nasional kita. Lalu yang kedua, kalau dari sisi dukungan organisasi internasional, bahwa konsep ekonomi sirkular ini melalui kebijakan dan resolusi global yang ada, ini merupakan sebagai respon tentunya untuk penanganan penggunaannya kembali. Hal ini bisa dilihat dari United Nations Environment Assembly yang keempat, tepatnya itu di Resolution 1, itu perihal apa? Itu perihal innovative pathway to achieve substantial product and consumption. Nah, sementara di PBB juga menjadi suatu atensi, ini menjadi masuk ke isu tujuan pembangunan berkelanjutan atau biasanya yang lebih umum kita kenal dengan SDG atau Sustainable Development Goals. Nah, di mana SDG ini khusus yang menangani perihal ekonomi hijau itu ada di SDG 12, di mana itu untuk apa? Tentunya untuk memastikan bahwa pola konsumsi dan produksi yang berkelanjutan itu dengan cara mengurangi separuh limbah. Kalau dalam SDG ini dia lebih detail, yaitu separuh limbah makanan di global, dan dihitungnya itu secara per kapita pada tingkat retail maupun dari tingkat konsumen itu sendiri. Dan adapun juga jadi pembahasan isu di World Economic Forum. Nah, oleh karena itu, masuk juga bagi DJBC sejak tahun 2020, ini sebagai inisiatif dan strategi DJBC untuk mendukung ekonomi sirkular. Nah, adapun dari latar belakang ini, tentunya Direktorat Jenderal Bea dan Cukai selaku perwakilan pemerintah di Indonesia tidak tinggal diam dan memiliki dari sisi outcome long term yang cukup komprehensif, yaitu diantaranya yang pertama, mengontrol limbah yang ada hingga zero waste. Ini dibuktikan per tahun ini melalui Bappenas, nanti akan dijelaskan di slide selanjutnya, bahwa ekonomi sirkular ini menjadi bagian dari transformasi keberlanjutan di negara Indonesia. Lalu yang B, insentif fiskal dari perlakuan kepabeanan dan perpajakan, tentunya urgensinya pembuatan kawasan ini, kalau memang tidak punya dampak yang masif, khususnya dari sektor bisnis, tentunya dari stakeholder pun atau investor tidak memiliki minat yang tinggi untuk ingin memperoleh fasilitas kawasan daur ulang berikat ini. Oleh karena itu, Direktorat Jenderal Bea dan Cukai ini memberikan fasilitas insentif fiskal berupa penangguhan bea masuk dan PDRI yang dari luar daerah pabean atau impor, atau dari TPB atau tempat penimbunan berikat. Dalam hal ini, misalkan tadi kan sudah dijelaskan ada 7 tempat minimum berikat. Jadi misalkan dari 6 tempat penimbunan berikat itu yang masuk ke kawasan daur ulang berikat itu tetap dikenakan penangguhan bea masuk dan PDRI. Dan yang kedua itu adanya tidak dipungut PPN atau PPNBM dari lokal ke kawasan daur ulang berikat. Jadi value added tax-nya itu dikecualikan dari lokal ke PDUB tersebut. Nah, yang ketiga tentunya selaras dengan yang A, yaitu tentu akan mendukung pertumbuhan industri daur ulang di Indonesia, karena mengingat saat ini sudah ada beberapa perusahaan industri yang mendukung dengan isu-isu ekonomi sirkular ini. Di sini saya mencoba ambil case di daerah Provinsi Banten, ada seperti PT Indah Kiat Pulp di kertas, lalu ada PT Lautan Steel dari sisi besi dan baja, itu sudah peduli dan tingkat awareness yang tinggi perihal ekonomi sirkular tersebut. Lalu yang terakhir yaitu mendorong inovasi dalam teknologi dan proses daur ulang. Nah, lalu adapun dari sisi usulan pembentukan KDUB ini tentunya tidak lepas dari adanya requirements, baik itu dari sisi lokasi, fisik, maupun administrasi. Dari sisi lokasi kita bisa melihat yaitu yang pertama berlokasi tentunya di kawasan industri yang ditujukan khusus daur ulang, lalu berlokasi di luar yang ditunjuk khusus daur ulang, lalu dari syarat fisiknya memiliki batas-batas denah yang jelas, lalu digunakan untuk kegiatan pengolahan bahan baku menjadi hasil produksi, dan juga tentunya bisa dimasukin oleh berbagai moda, dalam hal ini sanad pengangkut. Lalu dari sisi administrasinya tentunya kita perlu juga perizinan, karena sebenarnya dari pemerintah itu sendiri perihal ekonomi sirkular itu di-lead oleh Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan atau KLHK. Tapi karena ini berupa barang, DJBC tentunya berkoordinasi erat dengan KLHK tersebut. Oleh karena itu, sisi administrasi ini tentunya sangat penting. Di sini bisa dilihat ada 5 rencana persyaratan administrasi yang diusulkan dalam hal ini pembentukan KDUB itu sendiri. Nah, terlepas dari syarat secara umum tadi, tentunya karena ini memiliki suatu keunikan dan tujuan tertentu yang khas, KDUB ini memiliki ketentuan khusus dan kriteria impor limbah yang telah ditetapkan pemerintah untuk diizinkan proses impornya. Yaitu yang pertama, kita lihat dari yang kiri dulu, ketentuan khusus, bahwa pemerintah itu hanya mengizinkan dari limbah non-B3 saja. Karena ini di mana sudah di state, di aturan di Kementerian Perdagangan, bahwa kita tidak boleh mengimpor limbah kecuali ketentuannya itu di Permendak 8 tahun 2024, kecuali limbah itu beberapa limbah non-B3. Contohnya itu ada di kertas, logam, plastik, tekstil, produk tekstil, karet, dan kaca. Lalu limbah non-B3 tadi yang bisa masuk ke KDUB itu limbah padat tersortir. Yang ketiga itu bukan sampah rumah tangga, lalu tidak berbentuk cair, debu, lumpur. Dan di mana pengusaha KDUB ini wajib melakukan pengendalian pencemaran lingkungan sesuai ketentuan KLHK tadi. Nah, adapun dari kriteria impor limbah tadi, sebagaimana dijelaskan beberapa, yang pertama tadi sudah dijelaskan, yang kedua untuk pengimporan itu harus melalui pelabuhan tertentu sebagaimana terlampir, mulai dari Tanjung Priuk, Tanjung Emas, Tanjung Perak, hingga di Bitung, Sulawesi.
Mas Salim, izin waktunya 1 menit lagi ya.
Baik, lalu untuk yang lain juga itu perihal kegiatan landfill itu tidak diperkenankan. Nah, ini gambaran bagaimana progres usulan kawasan daur ulang berikat di Indonesia itu dari tahun 2020, mulai dari Direktur Fasilitas Kepabeanan, bahwa KDUB ini sangat berpotensi mendukung ekonomi sirkular, tapi masih terdapat isu dan tantangan yang perlu diantisipasi. Nah, oleh karena itu, DJBC pun tetap meningkatkan kajian KDUB ini di tahun 2023 melalui Direktur Kerjasama Internasional bahwa ini akan menjadi sebuah rekomendasi penyusunan kebijakan di circular economy yang mendukung Green Customs, di mana nanti tanggal 20 November Bapak Dirjen Bea Cukai mendampingi Direktur Fasilitas akan menghadiri COP29 di Azerbaijan untuk membahas KDUB ini, khususnya di acara United Nations Climate Change Conference-nya. Dan yang terakhir, karena ini sudah beralih kepemimpinan, Bappenas pun sudah membuat RPJP nasional 2025 sampai 2045 perihal kerangka ekonomi sirkular yang masuk ke agenda pembangunan transformasi ekonomi. Nah, melihat dari hal tersebut, tentunya terdapat strategi dan tantangan baik dari sisi pemerintah melihat KDUB ini. Tantangannya yang pertama dari sisi regulasi yang belum spesifik, ada leg spesialisnya. Lalu yang kedua dari kekhawatiran publik adanya permainan atau potensi penyalahgunaan fasilitas KDUB ini guna mengimpor limbah non-B3 secara ilegal. Dan yang terakhir itu strategi. Pemerintah memiliki strategi diantaranya yang pertama pembuatan aturan teknis dan sosialisasi kepada masyarakat. Yang kedua kerjasama dengan kementerian terkait dan para fasilitator perdagangan guna mendukung circular economy ini. Lalu yang ketiga itu usulan pengenaan pajak khusus yaitu recycle electronic waste guna pengendalian lingkungan. Dan yang terakhir tadi karena lead-nya di KLHK tentunya perlu koordinasi secara intensif dengan kementerian tersebut perihal penyusunan tata kelola pengelolaan limbah. Kurang lebih seperti itu gambaran dari kawasan daur ulang berikat yang mendukung ekonomi sirkular. Kepada moderator, dipersilakan. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Baik, terima kasih banyak Mas Salim atas materinya yang sangat insightful. Mungkin saya perkenankan kepada para teman-teman, apakah ada yang ingin bertanya terkait topik yang tadi Mas Salim sebutkan? Sangat bagus itu. Mulai dari kita tahu dari kepabeanan itu sendiri apa, terus mulai dari penjelasan fasilitas fiskal yang ada di kepabeanan itu apa gitu, dan ekonomi sirkular dan sekarang beralih dari linear ke sirkular ekonomi, serta kenapa sih konsep daur ulang itu masih belum banyak gitu ya diimplementasikan atau dipakai oleh para stakeholder gitu. Mungkin ada teman-teman yang ingin bertanya.
Nuwun. Ya, mungkin satu saja ya, Mas Salim mungkin bisa tolong jelaskan bagaimana kawasan daur ulang berikat ini bisa mencegah negara lain mengimpor sampah ke Indonesia ya.
Oke. Baik Bu, mungkin saya mau ulang pertanyaannya Bu ya. Perihal bagaimana kawasan daur ulang berikat ini dapat mencegah limbah yang masuk ke Indonesia Bu dari negara lain ya Bu ya. Jadi izin Bu, saya izin mencoba menjelaskan bagaimana upaya dari Direktorat Jenderal Bea dan Cukai untuk melakukan upaya preventif dalam hal limbah-limbah ini masuk ke Indonesia. Jadi melihat dari tadi sebagaimana dijelaskan di latar belakang bahwa tentunya banyak sekarang itu kondisi kalau di bagian pelabuhan ada balpres seperti baju-baju bekas atau sebenarnya waste dari sisi spare part yang tidak berguna itu masuk ke Indonesia. Nah, kawasan daur ulang berikat ini hadir dengan berbagai dari sisi aspek pengawasannya maupun dari sisi insentifnya, Bu. Kalau dari pengawasan ini bagaimana mencegahnya? Tentunya kalau dari sisi pencegahannya itu yang pertama tadi kita berdasarkan aturan kebijakan dari kementerian terkait akan ada proses namanya clearance di awal itu di pelabuhan. Nah, clearance ini pasti ada persyaratan yaitu limbah padat yang tersortir dan di sini pun ada petugas bea dan cukai dalam hal ini pemeriksa barang itu melihat limbah tersebut apakah sudah sesuai dengan ketentuan limbah yang diizinkan untuk masuk ke kawasan Indonesia, khususnya ke kawasan perusahaan atau daur ulang berikat. Lalu yang kedua, setelah disortir, dalam hal terdapat limbah yang ternyata ada bersifat masih abu-abu, apakah ini bisa dilakukan perizinan masuk ke Indonesia atau dilarang masuk ke barang larangan pembatasan, itu ada melakukan 2 pemeriksaan, Bu, namanya pemeriksaan fisik dan penelitian dokumen. Kalau fisik, tadi melihat secara visual langsung dari impor limbah tersebut, dan yang kedua ini dari penelitian dokumen. Nah, penelitian dokumen ini tentunya kita melihat dari si istilahnya eksportir dari luar negeri itu yang mengimpor limbah masuk ke Indonesia. Itu dari dokumennya apa? Misalkan dari beberapa dokumen ada di packing listnya, kayak nama-nama barangnya, atau dari misalkan karena dia impornya ini sebenarnya ada impor barang baru tapi diselipkan limbahnya, kita tentu melihat dari beberapa PO, purchase order-nya, invoice dari barang baru tersebut, kok ada hal perbedaan nih, barang limbah ini tidak ada. Nah, itu menjadi sebuah atensi. Kalau itu sudah jadi atensi, itu akan dilakukan di reekspor kembali yang tidak diperkenankan karena masuk ke komponen barang larangan pembatasan. Sementara dalam hal yang telah diizinkan dan sesuai ketentuan dalam hal ini limbah yang telah tersortir, limbah non B3, itu bisa diizinkan, Bu, masuk ke Indonesia dengan ketentuan tadi, yaitu tidak berbentuk cair, debu, lumpur, pasta, dan juga tentunya bukan dari sampah yang rumah tangga ya, atau household gitu, dan juga sampah-sampah yang memang tidak ditujukan untuk landfill dan juga manufaktur juga gitu.
Ya, baik. Terima kasih, Mas Salim.
Baik, Ibu.
Silakan, Brilia.
Iya, baik. Terima kasih banyak, Mas Salim, atas insight-nya. Okay, now let's we move on to our second speaker, Miss Titik. Okay. Let me introduce briefly about her. Miss Titik Kartitiani is an experienced environmental journalist and communication specialist with over 20 years in journalism, and she has contributed to major outlets such as National Geographic Indonesia and Mongabay, focusing on biodiversity, indigenous culture, and sustainable development. Her collaboration with WWF Indonesia and Indonesia Ministry of Environmental and Forestry reflects her deep involvement in environmental issues. As a Pulitzer Fellow and her study of development communication, Ms. Titik offers powerful ways to engage the public on ecological issues. Her perspective on connecting environmental topics to a wider audience will provide valuable insights for today. So for Ms. Titik, the screen is yours.
Hello everyone. My voice is clearly. I hope suara saya bisa didengar ya. Like the speaker before, I better share in bahasa Indonesia. Because most of audience is from Indonesia, right? And nice to meet you here, Sarin. I have you don't matter that I share with bahasa Indonesia and here. Seperti sudah kelihatan belum, Mbak? Sebentar. Belum ya?
Belum.
Sudahkah?
Belum.
Saya sudah share tuh. Sudah?
Sudah.
Sudah ya? Oke. Ini proyek saya dengan Pulitzer Center. Jadi saat itu saya dapat support untuk liputan tentang community based reforestasi di Gunung Bromo, Tengger Semeru. Hal yang pertama kali menarik dari proses reforestasi ini adalah masyarakat lokal, dalam hal ini suku Tengger itu menjadi leadernya. Nah, proses ini menurut saya menarik sehingga waktu saya ajukan ke Pulitzer Center ya disupport lah untuk melakukan peliputan ini gitu. Karena ada 3 hal penting yang di-highlight dari proyek liputan saya waktu itu. Yang pertama adalah reforestasi itu sendiri, kemudian community base dan dalam hal ini adalah masyarakat lokal Tengger. Dan satu lagi tentang biodiversity yaitu menggunakan tanaman lokal, artinya tanaman yang betul-betul tumbuh di hutan sekitar yang area reforestasi itu. Jadi 3 keyword itu yang kemudian menarik bagi publisher untuk share pengalaman di sini gitu. Jadi saya ajak piknik dulu ya ke Bromo. Nah, semua pasti sudah tahu ya Bromo tempat eh, saya bagi fotografer ya, Bromo itu dari sudut manapun cantik, bahkan siapapun yang motret pasti cantik gitu kalau udah pernah sampai ke sana. Jadi tidak perlu fotografer profesional untuk membuat kecantikan Bromo. Nah, karena itu Bromo kemudian menarik wisatawan yang datanya itu segitu ya, 368.000 eh, wisatawan dalam dan luar per tahun. Itu data 2003. Bahkan kalau peak season itu bisa 2.000 turis per hari. Dan perlu dicatat, Bromo terletak di kawasan Taman Nasional Bromo Tengger Semeru, yang artinya kita highlight di sini adalah Taman Nasional, artinya sesuatu yang rapuh yang harus dilindungi gitu. Nah, di sisi lain kita juga harus mengejar revenue wisata karena Bromo juga menjadi the next Bali kan dari 10 target Kementerian Pariwisata pada saat itu. Makanya tantangan yang dihadapi oleh ekologi Bromo itu ya cukup lumayan. Di sisi lain, di sini bermukim 500.000 masyarakat Tengger di kawasan yang luasnya 50.000 sekian hektar lah. Nah, itu wajah Bromo. Nah, kemudian Bromo di sisi lain itu tadi ada masyarakat, ada alam dalam masyarakat dalam hal ini suku Tengger, lalu ada alam yang indah dan juga aktivitas pariwisata. Nah, setiap tahun Bromo itu selalu kebakar. Itu faktornya banyak ya. Ada alam, ada human error dan lain-lain. Bahkan mungkin teman-teman tahu yang viral belakangan yang karena foto prewedding yang kemudian bus semuanya kebakar itu. Nah, itu sampai kalau hitungan kasar itu sampai 500 hektar eh, tahun kemarin itu di data. Dan yang namanya kalau kebakaran di hutan itu benar-benar kita akan sulit menghentikan gitu. Selain dari para petugas itu ya hanya melihat bahwa lahan itu terbakar. Kadang-kadang udah tidak bisa menghentikan. Jadi mereka hanya melihat dan pasrah gitu. Karena besarnya api dan keterbatasan apa istilahnya equipment ya dan juga sulitnya medan gitu. Itu kenyataannya seperti itu. Nah, lalu eh, reforestasi itu adalah sebenarnya ada kata reboisasi ya, tapi di sini lebih cocok menggunakan reforestasi karena konsepnya adalah membuat hutan itu kembali. Kalau reboisasi bisa jadi asal ditanami, asal hijau, selesai gitu. Tapi reforestasi adalah konsep untuk menjadi hutan seperti sedia kala. Meskipun kalau untuk menjadi hutan alam kan butuh waktu puluhan tahun, bahkan ratusan gitu. At least jadi tanamannya bisa beragam. Jadi seperti mengembalikan seperti semula. Itu konsepnya. Kenapa saya memilih kata reforestasi. Hal yang menarik pada saat itu adalah prosesnya. Nah, ini eh, dengan di-highlight community base. Jadi awalnya proses di Bromo itu cukup menarik yang di apa di memang awalnya tetap didukung oleh NGO ya waktu itu proyeknya JICA. Tapi itu kemudian ketika proyek itu berhenti, masyarakat masih terus menanam punya inisiatif sendiri. Nah, itu kan saya rasa keberhasilannya di situ. Jadi tidak kemudian katakanlah proyeknya 5 tahun, nanam pohon, 5 tahun selesai gitu. Ini enggak. Tapi itu tadi. Nah, ini yang akan saya share adalah bagaimana proses di sana itu tetap berjalan meskipun dari pemberi dana atau donatur atau funding sudah berhenti gitu. Jadi memang diawali dari proyek JICA waktu itu. Nah, yang menarik dari proyek ini itu eh, tertanam sebuah konsep bahwa reforestasi itu urusannya bukan dengan pohon atau dengan hutan, tapi dengan manusia. Karena beberapa proyek reboisasi menjadi gagal adalah ketika ditanam, difoto, habis itu siapa yang merawat? Nggak ada gitu. Akhirnya selesai gitu. Nah, kebanyakan banyak yang terjadi seperti itu. Nah, itu kemudian menjadi catatan untuk program ini. Maka yang pertama kali di treatment adalah community base. Jadi sosialisasi, membentuk kelompok kerja, baru kemudian teknik, dan satu hal, ekonomi approach, pendekatan ekonomi. Jadi kalau kamu melakukan ini, kamu akan dapat benefit. Dengan cara apa? Menjual bibit gitu. Nah, itu proses yang dilakukan pendekatan ini. Dan pendekatan ini dari grant pertama itu 5 tahun, butuh 2 tahun untuk membentuk community dan belum menanam apa-apa. Itu 2 tahun. Nah, sembari berjalan, misalnya pertemuan pertama itu katakanlah mengundang 20 orang, yang keduanya nanti tinggal 10, kemudian tinggal yang bertahan terakhir itu tinggal 5 orang. Misalnya kayak gitu. Jadi proses itu benar-benar menjadi seleksi alam. Nah, dari 2 tahun community awareness itu, kemudian tersisalah orang-orang yang dalam tanda petik yang beneran concern ke dia ingin eh, melakukan program penghijauan ini. Nah, sembari itu mereka kemudian mengenali pohon-pohon yang ada di sekitarnya, kemudian mengumpulkan benih dari hutan yang masih ada, itu benihnya dikumpulin, lalu mempelajari bagaimana mengecambahkan si pohon-pohon hutan itu gitu. Karena di Indonesia ternyata data tentang pohon rimba dan bagaimana pembiakannya itu belum ada saat itu ya. Mungkin kalau sekarang mungkin harapannya sih sudah ada gitu. Misalnya jenis pohon A itu bijinya cara nanamnya di mana, bagaimana, kan tidak hanya sekedar ditanam, tapi ada juga yang harus dibakar dulu, harus diparut dulu, harus dipanasi dulu, segala macam itu. Nah, itu teknis ya. Nah, ini saya sampaikan bagaimana mereka kemudian mengoleksi biji, kemudian membuat nursery, dan itu kemudian si apa istilahnya pendamping itu hanya mendorong dari belakang karena kesadaran itu sudah tumbuh di depan begitu. Masyarakat dengan sendirinya, apakah motivasi paling rendah adalah ekonomi. Jadi mereka menghasilkan bibit untuk dijual kepada program itu. Jadi memang pendekatannya tetap pendekatan ekonomi. Kalau untuk kesadaran lingkungan itu nomor sekian gitu. Itu butuh, tapi lama-lama akan sadar bahwa lingkungan yang bagus, hutan yang bagus akan mendatangkan uang. Itu akhirnya akan seperti itu gitu. Nah, ini yang saya sampaikan. Nah, hal yang menarik yang perlu di-highlight ketika sebuah program itu dipelopori oleh masyarakat lokal, mereka pun akan mengeluarkan pengetahuan lokal yang mungkin di dunia akademis dengan itu tidak tercatat gitu. Kayak di Bromo misalnya, Bromo itu setiap tahun selalu didera embun beku atau frost. Jadi kayak indah ya kalau untuk piknik, tapi itu merusak sekali gitu ya. Nah, suhu sampai di bawah 2 atau 3 derajat Celcius, semua tanaman kentang itu habis. Nah, bagaimana kami mungkin para sarjana pertanian yang di baliknya adalah teori gitu, tidak berpikir. Misalnya ada yang diselimuti lah biar hangat gitu. Itu pernah dicoba kayak gitu si tanaman, terutama kentang ya. Di sana kentang kan komoditas. Ya, enggak, udah boros dengan apa istilahnya pakai selimutnya itu kain, nggak berhasil juga. Dan ternyata apa, masyarakat lokal punya punya cara yang lebih arif. Setelah embun beku itu menyerang, paginya disiram pakai air biasa itu, dan itu dengan disiram pakai air itu menaikkan suhu dan tanamannya selamat. Nah, hal-hal begitu yang mungkin kita perlu perlu mencatat karena masyarakat yang melaksanakan program itu, mereka juga yang tahu bagaimana karakteristik pohon rimba ini tumbuh gitu. Lalu ini samping ini agak teknis ya, bagaimana biji itu ada yang ditanam tegak, ada yang agak miring, ada yang dibakar dulu, baru ditanam. Nah, hal-hal kayak gitu masyarakat tahu karena mereka sangat dekat dengan pohon dan mengamati bagaimana benih itu bisa tumbuh, bagaimana biji-biji itu tersebar. Nah, itu sekilasnya seperti itu. Nah, saya rasa dari saya itu, jadi bahwa bagaimana pentingnya melibatkan atau bukan melibatkan lagi, tapi mendorong masyarakat untuk berinisiatif dalam konservasi. Dalam hal ini adalah reboisasi untuk menanam reforestasi kembali itu menjadi highlight dari proyek liputan yang saya kerjakan. Jadi sebenarnya waktu saya ngerjakan tuliser itu kan waktu yang diberikan itu sekitar dua sebulan lah sebenarnya dari apa agreement turun kemudian sampai liputan publish itu sebenarnya 1 bulan, tapi sebenarnya survei survei saya ke sana dengan masyarakat di sana itu mungkin 2 tahun sih. Jadi 2 tahun sebelum sebelum saya dapat Pulitzer itu saya udah ke sana setiap setiap hari sering. Jadi liputan itu sebenarnya hanya hanya administrasi ya. Tapi interaksi dengan masyarakat bagaimana mereka sampai menerima kita di dapur gitu karena di Ranupane kan dingin ya. Mereka tidak menerima tamu itu di ruang tamu tapi di dapur sambil perapian hangat gitu. Dan di sanalah para fasilitator itu menyampaikan programnya lah dalam tanda petik. Jadi mengatakan memberikan informasi, memberikan penyadartahuan bagaimana program penghijauan ini atau reforestasi ini bisa dijalankan dan akhirnya akan memberikan manfaat bagi masyarakat Tengger yang ada di sana. Sebuah permasalahan kompleks di desa Ranupane terutama tempat saya melakukan peliputan ini adalah itu enclave, jadi satu kawasan masyarakat yang ada di dalam Taman Nasional dan tidak ada outlet, artinya masyarakat di sana itu tidak ada habit merantau. Jadi mereka akan tinggal di situ. Bisa kebayangkan konflik sosialnya akan semakin tinggi gitu. Nah, kalau tidak ada istilahnya intervensi dari pihak luar bagaimana mengatasi ini, ya cukup rumit masalah sosial yang akan timbul dan akhirnya yang tadi sebagai judul dari eh, diskusi hari ini ecological function itu menjadi rebutan antara alam, manusia, dan populasi manusia yang terus bertambah sementara luasan lahannya sama, itu menjadi masalah yang cukup tinggi. Selain eh, share ekologi, juga permasalahan sampah. Sampah yang domestik juga sampah yang dibawa oleh pendaki gitu. Itu katakanlah di Semeru itu kan sehari sampai 600 pendaki. Satu orang saja bawa botol air mineral, itu udah 600 botol per hari. Kebayangkan bagaimana sampah di sana juga menjadi permasalahan yang cukup rumit lah gitu. Itu sharing saya. Mungkin nanti dilanjut ke diskusi. Saya akan kembalikan ke moderator. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih banyak pada Bu Titik Kartitiani gitu. Jadi tadi sudah menjelaskan beberapa hal yang menarik gitu, apalagi yang terkait dengan Pulitzer gitu ya. Jadi sebenarnya Pulitzer itu yang tiga menarik tadi, yang menarik dari Pulitzer itu reforestasi, lalu community base akan masyarakat setempatnya, dan biodiversity-nya gitu ya, tanaman sekitar ya daerah reforestasi itu gitu. Jadi sebenarnya reforestasi ini yang lebih penting gitu ya dibandingkan dengan reboisasi gitu. Kalau reboisasi mungkin hanya menanam, tapi tadi ditekankan lagi gimana nanti siapa responsibility yang akan merawat tanaman tersebut gitu. Oke, saya buka sesi tanya jawab untuk teman-teman semua jika ada pertanyaan.
Ya, itu ada Mbak Ari mungkin ya. Silakan Mbak Ari.
Ya, silakan.
Ya, makasih Bu Desi, Brili. Menarik banget Bu Titi ini penjelasannya tadi. Saya penasaran seberapa umum ya pemanfaatan pendekatan lokal untuk memecahkan masalah-masalah ekologi kayak tadi gitu. Itu pertanyaan saya. Makasih banyak Bu. Menarik banget liputannya.
Ya, langsung saya jawab ya Mbak. Sebenarnya beberapa para Komdev ya, community development itu pertama masuk ke kawasan biasanya akan memetakan itu sih potensi masyarakat, kemudian indigenous knowledge, kemudian masyarakat adat yang ada di situ gitu. Hanya kadang-kadang sebenarnya ini untuk tidak hanya reforestasi ya, ada banyak intervensi kan yang dilakukan oleh mungkin NGO atau akademisi atau dari pihak kampus gitu. Permasalahannya adalah kadang-kadang kita akan terkendala waktu dari proyek itu gitu. Kalau waktu itu sebenarnya minimal sekali itu 5 tahun ya. Tapi kan ada proyek yang hanya 1 tahun, 2 tahun. Nah, pendekatan ke masyarakat akan sulit sekali kalau dalam waktu yang segitu gitu. Makanya kemudian langsung apa ya istilahnya program yang di-create dari inisiator, dari pendamping tanpa dalam tanda petik melibatkan masyarakat dari awal penyusunan program itu gitu. Nah, itu biasanya akan menjadi melelahkan karena tetap yang akan melakukan si pendamping ini masyarakat menjadi kayak tambahan gitu ya, faktor tambahan gitu. Makanya kalau ditanya seberapa sih sebuah intervensi atau program melibatkan masyarakat seperti yang terjadi reforestasi di Bromo, ya itu tadi tergantung timeline dari si proyek masing-masing. Begitu sih, Bu. Mungkin semoga menjawab.
Ya, makasih banyak Bu Titi. Terima kasih Bu.
Baik, oke. Jika tidak ada pertanyaan lagi, mungkin terima kasih banyak atas materinya, Bu Titik. Oke,
Terima
kita
kasih.
lanjut ke pembicara ketiga. Now we move on to the third speaker gitu. From Nanyang Technological University, Dr. Yusia Zhou or Sarin. Dr. Yusia is an assistant professor of accounting at Nanyang Business School. She holds a PhD in accounting and Master of Philosophy in Finance from University of Cambridge. Dr. Yusia's research focused on the intersection of financial and managerial accounting, particularly in sustainability. She has also held key roles in various academic and research organizations, including being a research fellow at the United Nations Supported Principles for Responsible Investment. Dr. Yusia, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Brilliant, for your moderation. Can you all see my screen and also hear me? Well, yeah, great. Thank you so much. And first, I would like to thank Desi for inviting me to speak and apologize that last week I was confused by the time zone. So thank you for rescheduling it so we can meet again here. And unfortunately, I'm not multilingual, so I can only speak in English here. And I really wish that I could have understood the more about what Muhammad and Titik shared just now, because from the slides it looked very interesting, but I just couldn't really understand it like verbally. But it'll be great to maybe have the slides later and then to understand more. For the slides that I'm using today, I'll also share it with Desi. So if you're interested, you can also have a look at the slides at your own time. So as Brilliant said, I'm originally Chinese. My name on the passport is Yu Xia, which means rain and summer. Yu is rain and Xia is summer. That's why I have the Serene as my English name. So you can call me Serene if you like. So I'm currently an assistant professor of accounting at MBS at NTU in Singapore. And this paper is co-authored with a PhD student in finance based in China. So he's very familiar with the Chinese data and Chinese setting. This is my first Chinese study. All my other studies are international. And all of my research revolves around corporate social responsibility and sustainable investment. And this paper delves more into the biology, kind of more about biodiversity and about the financial implications or accounting implications of biodiversity. And I believe it's actually a perfect setting to present it in for Indonesian audience, because this policy called ecological function zones is actually targeted for it's initiated in China, and it hopes to benefit developing nations when we are kind of balancing between environmental protection and also economic development. Yeah. So why do we want to study about this? Well, first of all, as I believe the two speakers just now have already demonstrated that biodiversity and ecosystem is very important for us. It is so important that they are fundamental to economic prosperity for us. However, unfortunately, our human activities to current stage have caused a huge percentage of loss in the wild animals and of the plants. So that's why over the time, countries have been responding using different kind of policies, and the most traditional policy is protected areas. I believe you also have that around you. However, what has been criticized for protected areas is that they are, yes, very effective for conservation. However, they have been ignoring the cost on the socio-economic development. So they are not really balancing between environmental protection and socio-economic development. And with the studies that we have so far on protected areas, the only analysis we have on socio-economic development is on the tourism, that there's only benefit in tourism. So we don't have comprehensive evidence about it. With this criticism on the protected areas, in the 21st century, we have a lot more variations of these policies coming out, and a very popular or the dominant measure we have right now is what the scientists call as the other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs. It's a terminology used by those scientists. What this kind of policy does is that it aims to achieve socio-economic and other values in situ of conservation of biodiversity. So it aims to achieve dual or more objectives while conserving biodiversity. However, so far, due to this novelty of this measure, we have very little evidence about this, whether it is effective, whether firms respond to it, and basically we know very little about how effective this policy is. Therefore, we come in to study China's major ecological function zone policy, which is a perfect example of this other effective area-based conservation measure. And we hope that by studying this policy from China, it will serve as an example for other developing nations, similar to China, hoping to balance in between biodiversity protection and economic development. Yeah. So just in case I cannot finish all the slides, let me just share with you a summary of my research question and the main findings. So we asked two levels of questions. See, people are smiling. I like the panda picture as well. So the first question we asked is on the firm level, because we're in a business school, right? So we're interested in the kind of micro level. So we asked if firms are in these designated zones for the ecological function zones, do they really improve their environmental performance? If so, why do they do it? How do they do it? And do it have any financial implications? Right. So for this, we find that overall, we find that firms do improve their environmental performance once they're in the zone. And we measure this environmental performance using a novel measure called environmental credit ratings, which are issued by the Chinese government. It's relatively official and objective. However, the magnitude on average is relatively small. So it's only improvement of 0.1 point out of a 5-point grading scale. So it's a relatively small improvement on average. Second, why do firms, before moving to why, we also explore the cross-sectional differences in different kind of firms, and we find that the improvement can be more in polluting industries and also in counties with significant subsidies or financial support from the central government. Okay, so the financial compensation from the government really matters. And now moving to why do firms improve? Two important mechanisms we document is that they improve because after the policy, the public become more aware of the environmental protection. So that have set pressure on the firms. Second is because due to this policy, the local government start to ramp up their regulatory enforcement level for environmental policies. That's also one of the reasons why they improve. Then moving on to how do firms improve? So we look at different types of air and water pollutants using all those scientific measure. We find that firms significantly reduce their pollutants in both air and water. So that's how they manage to improve their overall environmental performance. Lastly, on the financial implications, we find that overall, this policy is quite costly for the firms. However, if firms manage to improve their environmental performance or achieve superior, so above median environmental performance, they can benefit financially. And the benefit is mainly in the cost of debt, the profit growth, and also environmental liability insurance premium. So it's basically making it easier for them to acquire insurance, have a loan, and also improve their profit. So that's about our firm level results. And then moving on to the next level, we look at counties. So we are looking at a more broader aspect to look at, is there any welfare benefits for people in these counties, right? In the environmental and also social economic aspect. So we find that, yes, on the environmental side, we find that the counties improve in terms of air quality. So there's better air quality, less haze. And also these counties have fewer environmental violations. However, so far, we are not able to document any evidence in the actual kind of, the biodiversity about the animals, because it will take time for these policies to become effective. And then so far, so the time spent after the policy hasn't been sufficient for us to study that. And also, we're also discussing with scientists on how can we really measure biodiversity? How can we really measure the effectiveness of the policy? So this is still an ongoing issue. On the social economic development side, we find that after this policy comes in, people become wealthier. So there is higher GDP per capita, especially in the rural areas. So it's benefiting the people who need help. And the main mechanism is through industrial restructuring, which means that the policy has been reshaping the local industries. It is not kind of pushing out any existing firms. However, it has been becoming more restrictive on new firms trying to come in. So we have fewer new firms from polluting industries such as mining and construction, and we have more tourists coming into this region, and the counties receive more in tourism revenue. So that's the main benefit on the social economic aspect. Okay, right. So now, given this, have set the stage already. Now let's move into more detail about the zones. So, so this zone was implemented first in 2010 by a policy called National Major Functional Zoning Plan. So this plan actually divides the whole Chinese kind of country, the land area of China, into 3 zones. So one type of zones are for urbanization, like those big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, they are for urbanization. And then you also have areas specifically for agricultural products, because this type of land are very fertile, so they are very good at producing crops or having plants. And lastly, you have this zone called ecological function zones, which provide very important ecological services to the entire country or the entire region. So that's how the scientists in China have kind of separated the land area into 3 types. And the major criteria they used are on the ecosystem services, how important that is in this region, how much environmental carrying capacity there is in this region, and how development the area already is. For example, if say Beijing, so Beijing is the capital city, right? So because it is so developed already, and it will be most likely to be suitable for urbanization. Whereas in a small town, maybe in, for example, in Yunnan province, near the south, it is not developed yet. However, there are a lot of mangroves in this area. And this area will be very important in providing ecological services to the entire country, in providing oxygen and others. So that's why it will be important to become an ecological function zone. So this policy first came in 2010. So it introduced about over 400 counties into the first batch of ecological function zones. And then later, 6 years later, it introduced 240 more into the zones. So overall, the policies, the zones actually cover more than 50% of the land area in China. Okay. And the zones actually are not the same. There are 4 types of zones depending on their priorities. You can see here. But practically in practice, it's very hard to separate them because if they do one of the priorities, it's very likely they're also covering others, right? Because if they conserve our water resources, they are also doing work in soil erosion prevention. So the 4 types are only divided based on their priority, but the zones, the ecological function zones, they do all 4 types of tasks here. So this policy, why do we want to study this policy? Because this policy has a lot of significance in the world arena. Nationally, it represents a change from a one-size-fits-all approach from a more tailored approach in considering both local economy and ecological factors in introducing policies. Internationally, it is very important because it is the first national mandate by a major economy in the world, everywhere, to incorporate ecosystem services into land use planning. So if this policy is effective in balancing ecological protection and also in economic development, then it will become a very good example for other developing nations as well. Right, so given the policy, let's see how they look like. So just now I said that the zones actually cover more than 50% of the land area, right? So this is what they have covered. So essentially, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Chinese geography here. So they are mostly covering the areas that are less developed and have a lot of natural resources. So that's why even though it covers more than 50% of the land area, the people affected are relatively, the portion of human affected are relatively small. So that's how it looks like. And it's kind of spread it out across the whole country, depending on the natural resources in different regions. So coming to the study itself. So for this study, we hand collected all the zone area on the maps from the State Council policies in 2010 and 16. And then we map it to firm level environmental credit ratings issued by the government, either by the province or the city. So this is a kind of a innovation or contribution. We think this paper will contribute to the literature because this rating is very, very unique compared to all those ESG ratings that you may have studied or heard about in the existing literature. Why? Because this rating is government issued, right? So it is doesn't have any commercial ties, similar as other ESG ratings such as by MSCI or Refinitiv. Second, this rating is publicly disclosed, so it's not kind of in a black box as other ratings. Third, the data collected is by the local environmental agency inspection. So they go to the factory, take a sample, and measure the level of pollutants in the water. So they can collect the data for any firm. Doesn't matter it is publicly listed or private. So in this way, this rating covers all the firms in the region, right? Compared to, this is very different from those commercial ratings like MSCI ratings. They rely on public disclosure. That's why when firms disclose more, there might be an increase in the rating, which is very subjective. And lastly, there's an incentive system tied to this rating to the extent that if firms achieve a good rating, there will be incentives. They will benefit operationally and also financially. That's why the firms really care about the rating. They really pay attention to this and try to improve. Yeah. So these are the 4 characteristics, special characteristics of this rating that we hope to introduce to the literature And perhaps in Indonesia, there might be similar readings that you may use to also measure the environmental performance of the firms. So in the data itself, we have 5 levels. So 1 is the worst and 5 is the best. Okay. Right. For the other information, I'll go relatively fast. So we have firm level information on all the pollutants, on financial performance, and county level, we measure, for example, vegetation cover, we measure nighttime lights as a measure for the prosperity of the region. We also measure socioeconomic performance, such as GDP per capita from the statistical bulletin. Okay. Our final sample has about over 112,000 firm-year observations from the years 2008 to 2020. And then we have over 35,000 unique firms in a sample, including over 2,000 treated. And we have over 800 counties, basically covering the entire country. And then with 184 counties as the treated group. Okay. Now let me show the baseline results. So for the baseline results, we regress firms' environmental performance or environmental credit rating, ECR, on ecological function zones, EFZ, and a bunch of control variables. Okay. And then we gradually introduce, if I can have my laser pointer out. So we gradually introduce our control variables from here. And then we first control for year and county fixed effects. And then we introduce industry fixed effects. And lastly, we have the most stringent specification here by controlling for firm fixed effects. Okay. And so we use this result in the 4th column as our baseline results. So essentially what this statistics telling us is that the coefficient is positive and significant at the 5 percentile confidence level. And the interpretation is that if the firm is an effective major ecological function zone, this is positively correlated with the statistically significant 0.1 improvement in ECR. And remember that ECR is with a 5.125. So this is about 0.1 improvement of the scale. So it's actually, it is significant, but it's a bit small, right? Okay, then this is our baseline results, but this is not sufficient enough. So we need to do a lot of robustness checks. And given that this is a difference in difference design, so perhaps you have learned that in your class that whenever you do a difference in difference research design, you need to show parallel trends, right? So here is how we show parallel trends. We see that before the policy is implemented, there is no significant, the difference between the treatment firm versus the control firm, the difference is not significantly different from 0. Right? So you see the blue line is around the 0 line. However, after the policy is implemented, you see a jump from the baseline, and then it has been always significantly different from 0, and with a positive coefficient. Okay? So that's how we show the parallel trend, and it is also showing the dynamic effects of the policy. Okay? Then we also want to test the robustness of our results. So we have tested the same specification, but using mesh sample, mesh using 3 different techniques. And second, we have done stack regressions because this is a staggered differential, which means that there's treatment in different times. And then recently there are research saying that if you are doing staggered difference in difference research, and then you control for fixed effects, year fixed effects, and also firm fixed effects, it might give you biased estimates because the treatment effect might be different from year to year. Right? So a common solution here is to do stack regression. So I have followed that, and then the results proved to be robust. Okay. Then we consider potential spillover effects to see whether there's any spillover from the treatment county to the neighboring county, and also from other environmental policies during the same sample period. Luckily, the results remain consistent. And lastly, we have run a placebo test using a different kind of measure for the zones. These zones are actually similar as the zones that we're studying here. However, those zones are introduced a bit earlier in 2008 and 2015, and they are introduced by a bunch of scientists using a scientific guidance document rather than the policy that we are looking at here. So using this placebo group, we didn't find any results, which shows that the actual effect for firms' improvement is from a regulatory implementation perspective. So if firms know that they are in the zone, that is not sufficient enough for them to improve. They will only improve if the zone is implemented by a central government policy. So this shows us the importance of regulatory enforcement. Okay. After this, we look at the variations of the treatment to see if there's any heterogeneity among the treatment groups. And here we look at two types of cross-sectional variation. First, we compare between the polluting industry versus the non-polluting industry, and we find the results are mainly in the polluting groups. And second, we look at between counties receiving significant transfer payment, which is a kind of subsidy, financial subsidy from the central government, versus those do not receive it. And then we see that the results are more likely to be driven by those counties with financial support from the government, okay, which makes sense because they probably will do more if they have financial support from the government. Okay. Right, so next step is to look at why do firms change. So following the methodology guidelines from the government, we expect that there might be two types of mechanism. One is the public scrutiny on firms. Second is the enforcement level of the environmental regulators. So here we have tested it, and the results show that indeed, so you see that there's a positive correlation between this zone with both measures that we're looking at. So the public awareness here is measured by the search index for environmental keywords in Baidu. Baidu is similar as Google in China. So depending on how much people are searching for environmental kind of keywords online. So that is how we measure public awareness. For the regulatory enforcement, we calculate the number of environmental keywords in the local government working reports, which reflect how much they are working on environmental related tasks. So using these two measures, we show that public scrutiny from the environment and also local environmental authorities' work play a very important role in facilitating firms' environmental improvement in response to this policy. Okay. After looking at why, we're moving into the firm to see how do firms actually improve. So here, I really like this series of tests because here we are looking at objective measures. So here we regress the actual pollutants on the policy and controlling for the output of the firm with a bunch of fixed effects. So the pollutant we are looking at are the very common pollutants that the scientists have studied that have a major impact on the environmental condition and especially biodiversity. So here we look at a bunch of chemicals, and the most significant results we see is from this chemical. So is the called ammonia nitrogen. This is a major contributor for biodiversity loss. Okay, so here we see that following the establishment of the policies, firms in these counties, they produce. So here we examine the produced pollutant. They produce significantly fewer pollutants in those air and water pollutants, except for smoke, which is for the air pollution, but significantly less for those for the ammonia nitrogen. Okay, so this is about produced pollutant. We also look at reduced, removed pollutant. So here we find that the result is the opposite, which means that firms are removing more pollutant from the environment. And the most significant result we find is from COD, which is the chemical oxygen demand. That is a very commonly used measure for water pollution. Okay. So we see that following the establishment of these policy, firms, they also are removing a lot of pollution from the water and air, especially from the water. Okay. So that shows how firms are actually doing the work. Lastly, in the firm level analysis, we look at financial incentives. So this is more relevant to our business school. So we see that if firms improve or if firms achieve a high environmental performance, do they benefit financially or not? So here we look at 3 types of financial performance, and we got this from the policy from the government, because this is what the government says that they will benefit the firms by improving it. So here, the first row shows that if firms improve in terms of environmental rating, how they are going to benefit financially. So we see that firms, they will have lower debt costs, they will have higher profit growth, and lower insurance premium for environmental liability. Okay. And the second row, and the magnitude is about 37% lower for the debt cost. Okay. Then in the second row, we are looking at if firms achieve above average environmental rating, what is the response in the financial performance? We see that very similarly, with a larger magnitude, that firms will have lower debt cost, higher profit growth, and lower insurance premium. And the magnitude is much larger here, so it's about 73% lower compared to firms that have below average environmental credit ratings. The row I didn't highlight here, the third row here, I didn't highlight. This is the consequence for the firms that do not manage to improve or achieve lower level below median environmental credit ratings. So you see that on average, they're actually suffering. So they have lower profit growth and also higher premium, higher cost they have to pay for insurance. Okay. So overall, the message is this policy is on average quite costly for the firms, however, only beneficial for firms that manage to improve or achieve higher results for the environmental performance. I see some message in the chat. Are there questions? Okay, not yet. So okay, I'll move on, and then I'll leave the last several minutes for the questions. Okay. Okay. Right. So the next step is to look at the welfare impact. So we stand at a higher level to look at the county welfare benefits. And so here we examine that if the counties are in the ecological function zones, do they have any changes in their environmental and socioeconomic conditions? So not to bore you with more tables, I have summarized the results here. We can go through tables later, or we can skip them and then we can talk about other things that you might be interested in, such as postgraduate studies in accounting, and then about potential of doing research or pursuing a PhD degree in accounting. Okay. So here are the results on the county level. So I first look at environmental perspective. We find that firms, they have higher, they have better air quality, which is measured by lower haze concentration or PM 2.5 concentration. We also see that there are fewer local environmental violation penalties, which means that firms are overall doing better. So they are penalized less. Then we look at the socioeconomic development. We see that the local residents are enjoying higher GDP per capita, especially in the rural areas. And we also have a very innovative measure here to capture the prosperity of the local region called nighttime lights. So that is the amount of light at night for this region. So we see that after the policy is implemented, we have more lights in the night, which is likely due to the tourism, actually. Then at last, we look at how can the counties actually manage to achieve both environmental improvement and socio-economic development. So we look at the industrial structure to see if there's any changes in the structure. So here we see that first we see what are the firms that actually pushed away by implementing the policy. Interesting, we don't see that. So firms, the existing firms in the counties are not kind of forced to leave. However, there are fewer new firms coming into this region. And the fewer new firms are coming to the region are mainly pushed out from the polluting industries, such as mining and construction. Okay, so the dirtier firms are no longer permitted to enter the region. However, so how can the people really become wealthier, right? So the main reason we find is still from tourism. So here we have more tourists coming into the region, and the local people benefit more from this higher tourism revenue. Yeah, so that's basically what we find here. I do have tables here, but I think concerning about the time, I can maybe skip them. So we can have some time to answer the questions and have also about the chat about the postgraduate programs. Right. So this is about socioeconomic development. And lastly, about industry restructuring. Yeah, so mainly, so the main benefits we see here is an increase in the tourism number and the tourism revenue. So to conclude, what this study does is that we examine the effect of a very innovative policy in China called ecological function zones. We examine the effect on both firms and counties. And we show that it is viable to protect the environment without sacrificing socioeconomic development. Okay. This paper's contribution to the literature can be linked to about three aspects. So the first aspect is about firms' behavioral changes towards area-based biodiversity regulation. So here we have it's a rising literature in both accounting and finance. So here we have quite some studies that document how firms have changed their behavior towards environmental regulations, including the ones I've cited here. And also there are studies documenting the financial implications of biodiversity crisis. So these are the recent papers on the biodiversity finance. So we contribute to this literature. And second, we believe that this paper has contributed a novel measure or different perspective to look at corporate environmental performance, which is to use these environmental credit ratings. So this rating is very unique and also preferred compared to these commercial ratings because there's less concern about commercial bias, concern about opaque methodology, and also uncertainty due to firm disclosures. And lastly, we contribute to the economic studies that look at environmental protection policies. So prior studies, they mostly look at protected areas, whereas we are now looking at the more innovative policy belonging to the other effective conservation measures. So practically, we hope that the findings of this paper may help the global policymakers, especially in developing and emerging markets, to see how feasible or viable it is to use area-based policies to address biodiversity challenges while sustaining their economic growth. So that's about it, about the presentation. Oh, sorry, I just jumped out. Yeah, so and thank you very much for the time. If you have any questions, I would really love to hear about it, to learn more about how you think of this study, the policy, and also hear your perspective from Indonesia.
Yes, thank you, Sarin. Yeah, brilliant.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarin, Miss Sarin, for the insight. Are there any questions about these topics?
Is there any? Okay,
You
maybe
can,
start first.
yeah.
Your measurement of public awareness, yeah.
Mm,
It's from the media, right? Should we pay attention on the good news and bad news? Should we differentiate the type of news, or we just take them all as the public awareness? Because I think that to measure the public attention or public awareness, maybe
mm,
we need to separate them into
mm,
good news or bad news, maybe, yeah. Which
yeah,
really measure the public awareness. And then
yeah.
for the second, yeah, novelty, yeah, for the measurement, the environmental
Mm,
rating,
mm,
only for the China only, or
mm,
yeah, because we have proper here, we call it proper. It is
mm,
like rating provided by our Ministry of Environment.
mm,
Is it the same with the environmental credit rating? Oh, sorry. So this is credit, yeah. So this is not
yeah.
ratings, but environmental credit ratings. I'm not sure whether we in Indonesia have the similar rating. Yeah, thank you.
So, yeah, so actually, I'm not completely familiar with the ratings that you mentioned in Indonesia, but this rating is called credit rating is mainly because if the rating is good, the Chinese government will ask the central government, so the central bank to give some credit benefits to the firms. So they will lower the cost of debt or give for these firms. That's why it's called credit ratings because it will benefit them in the loans. So I'm not sure if that's similar, but I believe if there's a environmental rating issued by the government in Indonesia, actually there will be a quite unique channel to measure firms' environmental performance compared to using those commercial ratings from MSCI or Refinitiv because they have relatively lower coverage for countries other than the developed regions like US, Europe. For example, they have very, very limited coverage on Chinese firms.
Oh, yeah. Okay. But
Mm.
we have, yeah, our corporations or our companies are majority in family firms.
Mm.
Do you think that it will make a bias from the bank, because usually the banks is also owned by the family firms? Usually, yeah.
Oh, so
Is it different from
that's
China?
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah, because in China, the banks are owned by the government.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe we should focus on the governmental bank in that case.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's quite interesting how the families own both the banks and also the
Yeah.
firms. Right. There is a recent study, there are actually two recent studies that document the commercial ties between the ESG rating agencies and the firms being rated.
Mm.
So the rating agencies would rate the firms owned by the same parent higher because they belong to the same parent,
Mm.
which is like the bias that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. And how about the public awareness measure?
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. So we'll look at how it is feasible to separate the negative sentiment from the positive one, because there might be different mechanism playing around. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you very much for the suggestion.
But we have to do it manually, right? Or doing
Um,
data analytics or something using Python or something?
uh, Sometimes we need to check, but it may be possible for the search engine to
Mhm.
have the score itself. So sometimes it can tell you whether it is good news or bad news. Or we can use some data sets. So the common data sets we use here, one is RepRisk that will measure the reputational risk of firm, and then they will let you know whether it's good news or bad news. The second one is called Ravenpack. So
Mm.
that is also a measure for the sentiment.
Yeah, thank you, Sarin.
Yeah, thank you. So I see, did you has a question? How the Chinese government is aware to the environment regarding regarding the investment. Would you mind clarifying? So regarding the investment,
Maybe environmentally friendly investment, maybe.
So whether the government is aware of the environmental friendly investment? I think that's a very big question. So we haven't documented specifically in this study, but I do know another study that study how China is having this environmental investment in different regions, and that will change the environmental performance of the firms. Yeah. So as far as I understand, the Chinese government in recent years, after the new so President Xi, when Xi came on stage, he put a lot of efforts in sustainable development. So that changed the whole policy. So in recent years, I was quite impressed to see how many environmental protection policies there are in China and how they are promoting, for example, carbon market or carbon credits. And they are also, it is also one of the first country that mandated ESG reporting in the whole world. So it was mandated in 2008, very early. Yeah. So yeah, I was quite impressed to see how early or how much effort the government is putting in this area, given that it is still developing. But recently, given the downturn of the economic development in China, maybe they'll think more how to balance these two. Yeah. And that's it. Shall I? Thank you, Didi.
Yeah.
And shall I talk more about maybe postgraduate studies?
Yeah.
What will be the question? Or will be the questions that the students might be interested in?
Oh yeah. In here we have the mandatory for students to publish their PhD thesis. So what do you suggest about it? Because I think in Cambridge it is not mandatory, right?
No.
Yeah, maybe you can have the maybe suggestions or recommendations for our students doing their PhD thesis, and at the same time they also have to think about the publication.
I see. Yeah. So I didn't have this requirement because it's very hard to publish, especially in the top journals.
Yeah.
So well, I do recognize how hard it is to publish. I think first is to choose a topic that you are very interested in, because you are going to spend a lot of time on a single project for a long time. So it's better to do something you really love. So for me, I chose sustainability. So I've been always in this area. And second, be really updated about literature. So to know what has been done. And because the main thing when we review paper and reject a paper is that somebody has already studied about this. And if your paper is in the same area but hasn't recognized all the other papers, then it will be very detrimental to your contribution. So that's a major aspect. And second, while you are reading the papers, you need to be updated about the methodology as well. For example, the one I just mentioned about DID, difference in difference. So that's one of the most common approaches used in research, especially when we look at policy effectiveness. So if you want to do a research about using the DID, difference in difference, for example, you need to understand, are you doing a pure difference in difference? That is, you have only one treatment year, or a staggered difference in difference, which means you have different treatment years for different groups. For both, you need to show the parallel trends before and after to see that there's no significant difference between the treatment group and the control group before the policy, and there is a difference after. And then for the staggered difference in difference, you also need to do other measures to for example, the stacked regressions I mentioned in my slides just now to see whether the results are biased due to the different treatment years. Yeah, so that's an example. Some other methods you might use, such as propensity score matching or entropy balancing, or all the things, you need to be very careful about the implementation to be consistent with the literature and be transparent in writing. So the reviewers will just to know you are using the correct methodology. I think that will be quite critical in getting the paper published. Yeah. And lastly, about the writing. So for the writing, clarity is very important, and also having a structure. When I was first starting this career, I was very passionate about writing because I love reading novels. So I was using a lot of adjectives, like describing how interesting the result is, right? But then all the professors are telling me that don't do that. You write paper as if you are writing instruction manual, right? Be very, very scientific, and do not use any adjective other than significant and consistent. That's the only two right adjectives. And for each terminology or for each variable you are using in the paper, use the same thing throughout the paper. Do not change. You don't need to. So as non-English native speakers like us, we like to perhaps change our vocabulary to maybe enrich the story. But what they tell me is that you don't do that. You just use the same word. You don't need to show the amount of vocabulary you have. No need to do that. You just use the same word every time, so the readers will know what you're talking about. And so the main kind of tip for reviewing paper is that you just pretend you don't know anything, and then you start to read your paper. For every sentence, you ask yourself, do I understand what it's talking about? Is it necessary to say that? If not, you can delete. If it's not clear, you need to explain in plain language. So I guess that's quite useful for junior researchers when you are starting to know, and also to write papers that people want to read. Yeah. So I think I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you, Sarin. Maybe from students, any questions? Or Briley, you are also a student. Before we end the session, yeah. I think there are no more questions, really. Maybe we should just end the session.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Lucia Sarin for your sharing such valuable insights. Today we explore how designated zones can drive meaningful environment improvement at both at the firm and county levels. We've learned that while enhancing environmental performance can be financially challenging for businesses, it also brings benefits such as reduced costs and growth in profits. And for communities, these zones not only improve air quality, but also support economic growth, especially in rural areas, and encourage sustainable industrial practices. And then as we close, thank you to our outstanding speakers for their valuable insights. And all of we in today's event, we have explored the significance of ecological function zones and how understanding these areas impact both environmental sustainability and business practices. As Dr. Yusia's or Sarin final sessions provided enlightening conclusion to our discussions. I hope we are all inspired to apply what we've learned today in our own field, whether in policymaking, business strategy, or community engagement. So sustainability is not just a concept, but a shared responsibility, and each of us has a role to play in creating a balance between development and environmental stewardship. On behalf of the organizing team, I thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future events and continue this important dialogue. So, that's all for me. Thank you and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sarin. Thank you.
Yeah,
Pak
thank you.
Hasan.
Bye-bye.
Okay, yeah, thank you all.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
very much, Mrs. Desi,
Yeah,
Lucia
sama-sama.
Serin,
Thank
and
you.
Ms. Brilliantella as moderator.
Yeah, you did a great job. Thank you very much.